Okay, today's daf is Ayin. We're going to start on Ayin Amud Aleph at the top of the page, the first line at the two dots. This Gemara is dealing with the Mishnah that talked about Bitul Rishut again, which is a case where people, instead of everybody participating in the Eruv, somebody forgets and therefore holds everybody back from being able to carry into the courtyard. So he does something called Bitul Rishut, which is he gives up his rights to the courtyard, and by giving up his rights to the courtyard, he allows everybody else who already joined together to be able to use the courtyard. So the Mishnah had spoken about various permutations of this. It talked about a case where he gives up his rights to them, where they give up their rights to him. And at the end and then the Mishnah had said that Hayu Shenayim Osrim Zel Zeh She'achad Noten Rishut V'Notel Rishut Shenayim Notnim Rishut Ve'en Notlin Rishut. So it said that two people can give up their rights to the Chatzer. In other words, everybody can give up their rights to one person, as long as in the end one person or entity holds the rights. We're okay. But if people give their rights to two people, it's no good, because the whole idea of Eruvei Chatzerot is everyone has to be united. Either they have to be united through an Eruvei Chatzerot, which means everybody has the freedom of carrying in the courtyard, or they have to be united because everyone gave up their rights to one person. So the one person is the balabait, so to speak, or the balachatzer in this case. So there has to be unity. So the Gemara on the top of Ayin is saying ve'en lo tlin rishut. So what it says that you cannot give two people the rights to the chatzer. So if everybody relinquishes, let's say half the people give their rights to the chatzer to one guy and half give it to the other guy, that's no good. So the Gemara says, Lambali, why do I need this case? It says, Lo tzricha af al gav de amrele kine al menat laknot. Even though you told the person, take the rights to the chatzer from me and give them to the other guy. In other words, there were two people who were receiving the rights from everybody else. 5 people gave to the first guy. 5 people gave to the second guy. And they knew that in the end, only one guy is allowed to have the rights to the chatzer. So the people who gave to the first guy said to him, I'm giving up my rights to you, you give it to the second guy. So in the end, the second guy has everything. But I'm not going to see the second guy, so I'm giving it to you. You give it to him. So it doesn't work that way. It has to be direct. Everybody has to give their rights to the one guy if the one guy's going to have them. They can't give it to another guy who's going to be their shaliach. Ba'amine Abaye me Rabbah. Abaye asked Rabbah the following question: Chabisha sheshriin b'chatzer achad v'shachach echad mehem b'lei rev. Kshu mevatel v'shutot tzarich levatel kol echad b'yachad ulo. So Abaye asked, when you have 5 people in the chatzer, and one person forgot to join in the Eruvei Chatzerot, and now he has to give up his right to the Chatzer to everyone else in order to be able to allow them to carry, okay, because he's out. So does he have to give it to each person? In other words, does this one guy have to go to all 4 of the other people and say, I give my rights to you, I give my rights to you, I give my rights to you, I give my rights to you? Or since those 4 are joined in one Eruvei Chatzerot already, can he just give it to one of them and it counts for everybody? So Amar Lei said to him, he said, yes, they have to give to each one. Okay? They raised an objection to this. So we have various cases here in a Braita. One person who didn't join in the Eruvei Chatzerot can give up his reshut to somebody who joined the Eruv. 2 people who joined the Eruv can give up their rights to one person who didn't. In other words, as long as the recipient is just one. So if there are 2 people if there's somebody who didn't join in the Eruv, he can give his rights to somebody who did. If there are 2 people who didn't, they can give up their rights to 2 people who joined the Eruv. Okay? O le'echad shelo erev, or to somebody who didn't join the eruv. Aval lo echad she'erev noten reshuto le'echad shelo erev, ve'en shenayim she'erevu notnim reshutan le'shnayim shelo erevu. Ve'en shenayim shelo erevu notnim reshutan le'shnayim shelo erevu. But the general principle is that you can never give your reshut to two people who didn't join the eruv. If you gave your reshut to two people who joined the eruv, it's okay because those two people are actually connected. Those two people are part of the eruv. But if you gave your reshut, if two people gave their reshut to two individuals who are not part of the eruv, so it doesn't help because you still have two people, two recipients. In the end, how many balei chatzer do you have? Some people gave it to A, some people gave it to B, so you still have two. You have to have only united. It has to be all united. So So the first case was that one person who didn't join the eruv can give his rights to one person who joined the eruv. So what's the case? It said, now clearly, if the person, now we're talking about you forgot to join the eruv, but you don't want to ruin it for everybody else. So you give your rights to somebody who joined the eruv. But it says you gave it to one person. Okay, but how could he have an eruv if it's only one person? Obviously, there's somebody else. There's obviously at least three people. You didn't want to ruin it, so you gave it to one of them. But it says you gave it to one of them. One out of the two, right? So what does that show you? You only have to give it to one of them. You don't have to give it to all four people who joined the eruv. Just one. V'Rabbah, what does Rabbah say? And what are we talking about over here? Tahava umit. We're talking about where two guys had an eruv chatzerot together, the third guy didn't join, and then one of the guys who was in the eruv chatzerot died. So he's not around anymore. So that's why the third guy is allowed to give up his reshut only to the guy who's alive, obviously. He doesn't have to deal with the guy who died. But what about the last case? If you're telling me we're talking about a case where there are really only two people, because one of the two people who made the eruv died, and so really there's only two people left here. So what about the last case? What about the later case? Where one person who was part of the eruv cannot give his rights to one person who didn't make an eruv. But why not? But if the other guy who was part of the eruv died anyway, and there's just one person giving it to one person, so what's the problem? It's 1-to-1. So obviously in that case, there is a third person. That's why you can't have one member of the eruv giving up his rights to somebody who's not in the eruv, because there's another person there. And if there are three people in that case, that means there are three people in the first case. And if there are three people in the first case, what is it telling you? That when you gave up your rights to the chatzer, you gave it to one person, but there were really two people in the eruv, and it's still okay. We see that you only have to give it to one. We're not talking about a case where there are really only two people because one of them died. We're talking about cases where there were two people in the eruv, and you gave your rights only to one of the people. Okay, that's where it's a problem. So, I mean, that's good enough. That's what the Gemara is trying to prove. Abaye is trying to prove that's good enough to give it to one of the two. Mide area, can you really compare? Ha kedita, ha kedita. These are two different cases. So these are two different cases. The case in the beginning, where you gave up the rights to the chatzer to only one person in the eruv, that's talking about where the third person died. So that's why you didn't have to give your rights to two people. You only had to give it up to one person. But in the latter case, where it says that if you're part of the eruv, you can't give up your rights to someone else, that's talking about where the other member of the eruv chatzerot is still alive. So how can you go on his behalf and give your rights to somebody else? You joined with the other guy. You're partners. You can't just sell out the partnership to somebody else, right? It has to be together. Teda, no, this is true. Dekatane sefa, because it says at the end, dekatane sefa deresha, because the latter part of the beginning of the Braita said, Ushnayim shelo erevu, two people who didn't make an eruv, notnim reshutan, lishnayim she'erevu, lishnayim in le'achad lo. Because what about the other case? The other case says that two people who were not part of the Eruv can give their rights to two people who are part of the Eruv. What does that show you? They have to give their rights to both of them, to A and to B, not just to one of them. Right. But they have to give, each one has to give to both. Right? So the first person who wants to give up his rights has to give it to A and B. The second person has to give it to A and B. Okay? But V'Abaye, Amar Abaye will say, Mai lebet le'echad mibet. What does it mean when it says two? It means to one of the two. In other words, there are two people who didn't join. Each one can give it to one of the two who did join. Right, you don't have to go to both. If that's true, but if that's the case, why does it have to use the example of two? Why does it say two? Why doesn't it just say one? It will be the same thing. That the one person who didn't join the Eruv will give to the one person who joined the Eruv. Why does it have to mention the two? Kasha, that's a difficulty. We don't know the answer. Okay? In other words, in that case, why doesn't it mention there were two people who, there are two people who both want to give up their reshut? Why doesn't it mention that they gave it to one person? That would be a bigger chidush. If it's trying to show you that you only have to give it to one of the people, and each one doesn't have to give to both, but that you choose one member of the Eruv and give it to him, then it should have said that. That would have been a bigger chidush. That would have been a new idea, that you only have to give it to one member of the Eruv, you don't have to give it to everybody. So the fact that it mentions that they give it to both, maybe that means you have to give it to each one, A and B. So Kashya, the Gemara says we don't know the answer to that, but Echad shelo erev noten reshut le'echad she'erev. So what about the case where one person who didn't join in the Eruv, he gives his reshut to somebody who did? So la'abaye de'ite v'kamash malan de'en tzarich levatel reshut lekol echad v'echad. So according to Abaye, that case is easy. What does it mean? You only have to give it to one of the members of the Eruv. L'Rabbah dahava umit. And according to Rabbah, we must be talking about a case where the third guy died. That's why you only have to give up your rights to one member of the Eruv, not to two. Velo gazur zimnin de'ite. And we don't make a gezerah and say, maybe if we allow you to give up your rights to just one person, next time when the second person is around and didn't die, you'll also give up your rights to only one person. We don't say that. We say that since he died, you only have to give up your rights to the one person. And two people who join the Eruv can give up their rights to the one person who didn't join. So pshita, that's obvious. As long as you're giving it to one person in the end, we don't care. Because you might have thought, since this one guy refused to join the Eruv or failed to join the Eruv, maybe we should penalize him. It comes to tell you we don't penalize him. We don't penalize him for not joining the Eruv. We say that the two people who did join can give up their rights to the one person who didn't join if they want to. Two people who didn't join the Eruv can give up their rights to the two people who joined the Eruv. According to Rabbah, this second case clarifies the first case. Why? Because you see from this case that actually you have to give up your rights to each of the two people who made the Eruv Chatzerot, to A and to B. The two people who were left out have to go to A and to B, both of them, and give up their rights to both in order to allow A and B to carry. And therefore, in the first case, where it said that you only have to give up your rights to one person in the Eruv, it must be talking about a case where the other guy died. Right? According to Abaye, why do you need this case? This case is obvious. He already told you that if you have, that you can give up your rights even to just one person, right, who was part of the Eruv. Even if 10 people made an Eruv, and they're all alive. According to Abaye, you can give your rights up to just one of them, and it's good enough. So why does it have to mention giving it to two? So he says, the chidush here, the novelty here is that there are two people who didn't join. So the problem is that since you have a case that you're going to that since you're allowing two people to give up their rights to two members of the Eruv, maybe we should be worried that the members of the Eruv will give up their rights to the two individuals who didn't join. And are you allowed to do that? Definitely not. In other words, according to Abaye, you can give up your rights to the members of the Eruv. Either, according to Abaye, you just have to give up your rights to one of them. According to Rabbah, to all of them. But you can give up your rights to the members of the Eruv. And that's fine because they're all connected. They're all one. But the members of the Eruv, if they give up their rights to two individuals, that doesn't help. Because those two individuals are not united. They're two separate entities. They're not part of the Eruv.
So each one of the second group has to inform the two people, each one individually.
Well, if in the end two different people receive the rights to the Chatzer, it's no good. It's not good. Because those two people didn't join the Eruv. If you join the Eruv, it's like a corporation. You're part of the whole system. You're one entity. One entity. If the people who are part of the Eruv give up their rights, they can give it up to one person, but they can't give it up to two people, because if two people who are not part of the Eruv have the rights, you have two instead of one. You have to have only one Bala Chatzer. Okay? So that's the problem. You might think, if we knew that two people can give up their rights to members of the Eruv, and according to Abaye, it doesn't matter. One can give it to one person in the Eruv, and the other one can go to B in the Eruv, and it doesn't matter because everybody in the Eruv is one. But the people in the Eruv can't go and give it to two people who are not part of the Eruv, because the two people who are not part of the Eruv are independent of each other. So it's like, in the end, you have two owners. Okay, when you have the Eruv, that's all considered one ownership because they're all together in a corporation type of thing. So the Abaye is saying it has to tell you it's no problem to go to two different people to give up their rights to two different members of the Eruv. And we're not concerned that then the people who are part of the Eruv might think it's okay to give up their rights to two people who are not part of the Eruv. We're not concerned that it's going to go the other way. Kamash malan. So lamali, why does it have to mention the case that you can give up, two people can give up their rights to the one person who didn't join the Eruv? So lamali, why do I need that case? What might you have thought? That in a case where nobody made it, in other words, if somebody made an Eruv, some people did and some people didn't. So then we allow the people who didn't to give up their rights to the Chatzer in order to support the people who did, and to enable the people who did to use the Chatzer. But if nobody made an Eruv, you might have thought, you can't use Bitul Reshut. Why? Because you're undermining the idea of Eruv. Shelo tishtakach Torat Eruv. You can get away with not having an Eruv, because everybody will just give their rights to one guy. The one guy will be the only guy who's allowed to carry stuff, and people will be fine with it. So Kamash Malan, it comes to tell you that it's okay. In a situation where they didn't make an Eruv, they can all give up their rights to the one guy. It says that one guy who made an Eruv cannot give up his rights to one guy who didn't. According to Abaye, this case is necessary to clarify the first case. In other words, that the case here, that one person who made the Eruv cannot give up his rights to one person who didn't make the Eruv, okay, is to show you that we're talking about a situation where both members were still alive, right? That's why it has to mention that the one guy who's part of the Eruv can't give up his rights to the one guy who isn't part of the Eruv, because there's another guy there, because the other guy is still alive. The other guy who's part of the Eruv is still alive. According to Rabbah, Aideh de Tana Resha Tanana Misefa. That according to Rabbah, this case is superfluous, since we already know that the third person, even though according to Rabbah, in the first case, the person who was a member of a Chatzer died, and really there was only one person left in the Eruv Chatzerot, and that's why the person who wasn't part of the Eruv is allowed to give up his rights to the person who is part of the Eruv, and he doesn't have to go to more than one person, because the other guy died. Still, in the latter case, it's just there for it to be balanced. In other words, it's not really a chidush. It's not a chidush that the person who is part of the Eruv is allowed to give up his rights to the person who isn't part of the Eruv, because the third person died anyway. In other words, if the third person died, you wouldn't need to know that, because it would be obvious. There's only two people left. So obviously, whether A gives to B or B gives to A, it doesn't matter. It's no new idea. But the latter case is talking about a case where the third person is still alive. So therefore, since the third person is still alive, not only could one person not give his rights to just one member of the Eruvei Chatzerot, but certainly one member of the Eruvei Chatzerot cannot give up his rights to somebody who's outside the Eruvei Chatzerot. According to Rabbah, it always has to be all or nothing within the group. You either have to give up your rights to every member, or every member has to give up their rights to somebody else. But you can't have that I gave up my rights to you, and you're part of the Eruvei Chatzerot, and that counts for everybody. That never works, according to Rabbah. Only according to Abaye. So now, two people who made an Eruv can't give up their rights to two people who didn't. Hatu lamali. Why do we need this case? What's the chidush of this case? Obviously, you cannot give your rights to more than one person, and those two people are not connected. Lo tzricha debatel lechad minayu lechavrei. Maudete ma lishterele kamashmalan kevan debitna debatel lo havu leishar yuta be'achatzer lo. So what we learn is that why would you think? What is the new idea in the latter case? Why would you think that two members of the Eruv could give up their rights to two people who are out of the Eruv? How could that be? You're still having more than one. You can't have more than one owner in the end. So how could you even think that you would give up your rights just to one, to one and to the other too? So the answer is because you might think that, like we said before, that you give to one, and that one is supposed to now give your rights to the other one. So let's say half the people in the Eruvei Chatzerot gave to A, and half of them gave to B. But the people who gave to A intended that he would give their rights over to B, so it would all be consolidated. But no, we say that since at the moment they gave their rights to A, and half the people gave their rights to B, so at that moment when they gave their rights to A, it was ineffective, it was nothing. It was nothing, because they were creating two different destinations, right? Two different recipients, so it's no good. He doesn't now have the right to transfer over to B. He can't. Everybody has to directly give their rights to the one recipient. That's the answer. So, okay. So ve'en shenayim shelo erevu notnim reshutan l'shnayim shelo erevu. And similarly, two people who are not part of the Eruv can't give to two people who are also not part of the Eruv. Same reason. You can't have two recipients, right? You have to consolidate into one. So what is the point? So what is the chidush here? Hatu lamali. What do you need this for? Lo tzricha de'amrei kinei al menat laknot. Again, same thing. That you might think that you can give your rights to number one, and he's going to give it to number two. Right? I'm giving mine to him, he's going to give it to number two, and we're going to consolidate in two steps. Right? First I give to him, and I give to A, you give to B, and then A will give to B. You can't do it that way. It has to be direct. The transfer has to be direct. That's the so we have several examples of the directness of the transfer. That there can't be a middleman along the way. So now the Gemara says, Ba'amine Rava Merav Nachman. Rava asked Rav Nachman, Yoresh Mahu Shivatil Reshut. What happens if somebody dies on Shabbat? And so someone inherits their property. Okay? In other words, what happens is somebody died on Shabbat and inherits their father's house. And their father's house, let's say their father didn't make an Eruv on Friday. He didn't join in the Eruv, and now he died on Shabbat. And the Yoresh, the guy who inherited, now has the rights to that house and rights to part of the Chatzer. And his father never made an Eruv. So what does he do? Can he do Bitul Reshut? Can he go to the other people in the Chatzer and say, I give up my rights to the Chatzer so it won't ruin your Eruvei Chatzerot. So now we move to Amud Bet. Echad iba ela aruvei me'etmol matzeh me'arav matzeh me'arev batulei nami matzeh mevatel aval hai kevan iba ela aruvei me'etmol lo matzeh me'arev lo matzeh mevatel. So the question is like this. O dilma yoresh kar'e davuhu. So what do we say? Two possibilities. Either we say that the inheritor, right, the guy who was yoresh, the guy who inherited, the heir, so do we say only somebody who could have made the Eruvei Chatzerot on Friday can do Bitul Reshut on Shabbat? And this Yoresh, he didn't own this property on Friday. His father was still alive. So he couldn't have, the son could not have joined in the Eruvei Chatzerot. It wasn't his house. Now that it's his house on Shabbat, it's too late. Only somebody who could have joined on Friday can give up their rights to the house, to the Chatzer on Shabbat. Or do we say, no, Yoresh kar'e davwahu, that a Yoresh, an heir, is like the leg of his father. So since his father could have joined the Eruvei Chatzerot on Friday and he didn't do it, it's as if the son could have joined and didn't do it. And since the son could have joined and didn't do it, because he's only an extension of the father, therefore he's allowed to do Bitul Reshut on Shabbat. So Amar Lei said to him, Ani omer mevatel, v'ani dvei Shmuel tanu en mevatel. I say, this is Rav Nachman talking. Rav Nachman says, I say he can. Since his father could have joined the Eruvei Chatzerot on Friday, and he's an extension of his father, I say that he could. He can give up his rights to the Chatzer on Shabbat. And that will allow the members of the Chatzer to use the Chatzer on Shabbat. However, the members of the yeshiva of Shemuel say, no. Since he didn't actually possess it on Friday, his father possessed it, therefore he can't do Bitul Reshut on Shabbat, because he never would have been allowed to do Eruvei Chatzerot on Friday. There is an objection to this. So it says anything that was permitted for part of Shabbat is permitted for the whole Shabbat. Anything forbidden for part of Shabbat is forbidden for the whole Shabbat, except for mivatel reshut, except for somebody who gives up their rights to the Chatzer. So what is this talking about? Kol she'utar lemiktzat Shabbat mutar lechol Shabbat kegon she'erev derech hapetach v'nistam hapetach erev derech halon v'nistam halon. Because, in order to make an eruv between two, we learned it before. In order to make an eruv between two chatzerot, they have to have a connecting opening, a door or a window. So if they made an eruvei chatzerot, two chatzerot joined, two courtyards joined, because they had a common door or they had a common window, and then that window gets closed up on Shabbat, or the door gets closed up on Shabbat, still, since at the beginning of Shabbat they were unified, they stay unified. So זה הכלל לעתויי מבוי שנטלו קורותיו או לחייו. And it says זה הכלל, this is the general principle to teach you that even if you had a mavoy, you had an alleyway, and we learned that if you have a mavoy that's closed on three sides and it's only open on one side to the Reshut HaRabim, to the public domain, what do you have on the end? Either korah, either a beam going over the top, or lechi, or a vertical beam going on the side, so that people will not carry from the mavoy into the public domain. What happens if at the beginning of Shabbat the korah was there? At the beginning of Shabbat the lechi was there, and it gets taken away in the middle of Shabbat? It's okay, because since at the beginning of Shabbat it was there, it was beheter. We started beheter, it's fine. Now, it says anything that was prohibited at the beginning of Shabbat is prohibited all Shabbat. כל השבת כולה, כגון שני בתים בשני צידי רשות הרבים והקיפום נוכרים מחיצה בשבת. This is what we learned on Erev Yom Tov. Right, you have two houses in the Reshut HaRabim, and non-Jews came and made a wall around them on Shabbat. So before Shabbat, they couldn't have joined together, because there was no chatzer, there was no courtyard, there were just two houses in the middle of the street. Now there's a wall around them creating a chatzer. Right? But since on Erev Shabbat, they were not united, they couldn't have done bitul reshut. Let's say the person in house A wants to give up his rights to the person in house B, or vice versa. Obviously they can't make eruvei chatzerot because it's already Shabbat. But one cannot give up his rights to the other one because there was no chatzer at the beginning of Shabbat. So whatever was prohibited for the whole Shabbat. And since at the beginning of Shabbat they were totally independent, they didn't have a wall around them, it's going to stay that way. Okay, now we get to, and Zeh Klal Latuye Mai, Latuye Mit Nochri B'Shabbat. And why does it say Zeh Klal? This is the principle. What further case is there of something that was prohibited for part of Shabbat, it can't be changed on Shabbat? That's a non-Jew who died on Shabbat. That if the non-Jew was preventing them from making an Eruvei Chatzerot, he didn't rent his part in the Chatzer to the people, and then he dies on Shabbat, since it was prohibited at the beginning of Shabbat, it stays prohibited for the whole Shabbat. Okay, there's nothing they can do. The Katanei, and it says Chutz mi bevatel reshut, that nothing can change. Whatever's permitted at the beginning is permitted. Whatever's prohibited at the beginning of Shabbat is prohibited, except for mivatel reshut, that can change. Mivatel reshut is something that can change. Ihu in yoresh lo. So what does it mean? The original person, not the yoresh. It's implying only the person who was originally part of the Chatzer can do bitul reshut even on Shabbat. So even if he said no at the beginning of Shabbat, but he changed his mind. So everybody made an Eruvei Chatzerot, and one guy said, nope, I'm not going to be part of it, and I'm not giving you my rights. Then in the morning he says, you know what, I changed my mind, I'll give it to you. So that's okay. But Yoresh lo, but not the Yoresh, only the original guy who was there from the beginning of Shabbat can change and give up his rights on Shabbat. But the guy who didn't own it, because his father was alive at the beginning of Shabbat.
We're talking about Yoresh, Aviv met
on Shabbat, yeah. So that's why he can't. So now it says, Ema chutz mitorat bitul reshut. Not necessarily true. Not necessarily true. It could be that the inheritor can give up. The heir can give up his rights on Shabbat. It means torat bitul reshut, meaning that anybody who's able to give up their rights to the Chatzer can do so even on Shabbat. So it still might be that the son is considered an extension of the father, and that he's able to do it. So what that he couldn't do it at the beginning of Shabbat? But he's an extension of the father. So since his father could have at the beginning of Shabbat, he could too.
Yoresh in the beginning was not extension of the father. He was not chelek mi
Right.
But somebody that had part of the Yerusha.
Right.
It's like a Baal Habayit.
Right. So the question is, do we say that since the father died on Shabbat, do we say to the son, it's like he owned it even before Shabbat? Because he's like part of the father. That's what they keep defending. They didn't get to the end yet. So etive, there is an objection. Echad mibnei achatzer shemet v'iniach reshutol le'echad min hashuk. Mibe'od yom oser, mishachashecha eno oser. Ve'echad min hashuk shemet v'iniach reshutol le'echad mibnei achatzer. Mibe'od yom eno oser, mishachashecha oser. So we have two cases. If somebody who was part of the Chatzer died, okay, and left his rights to somebody who doesn't live in the Chatzer. So in that case we say, if he died before Shabbat, it's no good. Because the guy who inherited before Shabbat didn't join in the Eruvei Chatzerot. Right? But if he died on Shabbat, it's okay because it's too late. The guy already joined in with the Eruvei Chatzerot, let's say, and then he dies. So somebody else inherits it, but it's okay because at the beginning of Shabbat he already set up to be part of it. What happens at Echad min hashuk shemet? So let's say somebody who doesn't live in the Chatzer, but he owns a house in the Chatzer, but he doesn't live there. So he dies and leaves it to somebody who's part of the Chatzer. So if he leaves it to somebody who's part of the Chatzer before Shabbat, no problem, because the guy who's part of the Chatzer joins. He joins with everybody else. But if it's mishachashecha, oser. But if it's after it already became dark, then it's no good. So why is that? Because you see that the person who inherited it, he can't do anything. Right? In other words, the person who he died on Shabbat, he dies on Shabbat. He's echad min hashuk. So that means he's not normally there. So he didn't make an Eruvei Chatzerot with the people. Normally he just has his property there. It's empty, let's say. It was vacant. So if he died before Shabbat and he gave the property to somebody who lives in the Chatzer, no problem. Because the guy who lives in the Chatzer will join. But if he dies on Shabbat, now this person who's a member of the Chatzer inherits the property on Shabbat. It comes to him on Shabbat.
How can he inherit on Shabbat.
It's automatic.
It was on the will.
It's in the will. It's in the will. So you automatically got it. So what happens? So now he has a piece of property that isn't part of the Eruvin Chatzerot, because he got it now in the middle of Shabbat. So what does he do? It says Oser. So it prohibits everybody else. Okay? So when it was Echad min Ashuk, in other words, in the first case, it was the opposite. Right? It was the opposite in the first case, because it was one of the members of the Chatzer that died. So if he died after Shabbat started, he had already joined the Eruvin Chatzerot. But here, the guy who died didn't live in the neighborhood, so he didn't join the Eruvin Chatzerot, but he never created a problem before because he never lived there. So if he dies on Shabbat, though, he's giving his property to somebody who does live in there. And now somebody who does live in there has a piece of extra property, an extra right to the Chatzer that he didn't include in the Eruvin Chatzerot, Oser. So what does the Gemara say? Amai Oser Nivtil. So according to you, that somebody who's Yoresh, somebody who inherits, should be able to do Bitul Reshut even on Shabbat. So why can't this guy do Bitul Reshut on Shabbat? Why does it say Oser? The answer is, Mai Oser Nami de Katane Ad Sheyivatel. So what does it mean? It means it prohibits until he does bitul. So really, he still has to do bitul reshut. This guy who inherited extra rights to the Chatzer on Shabbat has to give them up to the rest of the Bnei Chatzer in order to allow them to carry. But he indeed is allowed to. He's able to do it. Tashma, come and listen. Yisrael v'ger shuriyun b'megura achat umet ger mi'b'od yom. So it says, you have a Jew and a ger, a convert, who live in one place. It says Megura, which means a goren. It's some kind of a threshing area, okay? So what they lived in two different apartments, but they shared a chatzer. And normally they would have to make an Eruvin Chatzerot between them, right? Osrin ze'al zeh, they prohibit each other. So the ger died before Shabbat started. Afal pi shechzik Yisrael acher ben chasav oser. So even though, it's a little bit confusing, it says, even though a Jew took his property, he prohibits. In other words, what? Why? Because a ger has no yorshim. A convert doesn't have any heirs. He doesn't have any Jewish family. He's a single convert. We're assuming he doesn't have any kids. So the point is, somebody comes and takes his chelek. A Jew, whatever. So when he dies, his stuff is hefker. His stuff is ownerless because he has no yorshim. So a Jew comes and takes his apartment. So now what happens? There were two Jews and they share a chatzer, so it's no good. Now if he dies on Shabbat, so now even if nobody takes it, it's no problem because the ger, his reshut is given up. Automatically the other Jew can just take it. Right? The other Jew just assume it gets swept into his ownership, and so it's only one person owns the chatzer now. There's no other rights to the chatzer. So that's how it works. So now, hagufa kasha, this is an intrinsic problem, because amart mi be'od yom afal pi shechizik. Why did you say if he died on Friday during the day, even though another Jew takes it, it prohibits the first Jew? What do you mean even though? Velo mi baya ki lo hechzik ad diraba ki lo hechzik lo asar. It's on the contrary. If nobody took, the ger lived in his apartment and he dies on Friday. If nobody takes that apartment, fine. Now the Jew who lived in the other apartment and they shared a chatzer, he's fine. Nobody took it. It's even better. So why does it say even if somebody took it, it's a problem? It should say if somebody took it, it's a problem. If nobody took it, it's fine. Because the ger is gone. So it says, Amar Rav Papa, Ema afal pi shelo hechzik. What it means to say is, even if nobody took it, it still prohibits the Jew. Wait a second, but that's not true. Even though he did take, it's a problem. This is what it means. So what it means is, that if the ger dies on Friday, even though a Jew doesn't come to take possession of that apartment until Shabbat started, he will prohibit the other Jew. When the ger dies, he doesn't have any yorshim. So nobody has the rights that he had to the chatzer. Nobody takes the rights. So it's just one Jew living. There are two apartments. There's just one Jew living and using the chatzer. The ger who died, he doesn't have any heirs. But let's say another Jew comes on Shabbat and he takes the ger's apartment, right? So now what do we say? Since he could have taken it on Friday, it's as if he took it on Friday and he ruins it for the other Jew. Okay, if nobody had come to take the ger's apartment, fine. But this Jew who takes it on Shabbat, since he could have come to take it on Friday, retroactively we consider it like he took it from Friday. Okay? So then what happens when the ger dies on Shabbat? It says even though nobody took it, it doesn't prohibit. It's confusing. It says even though nobody took it, it doesn't prohibit the Jew. It should say if nobody took it. Because saying even though sounds like if somebody took it, it's fine. And even though nobody took it, it's fine. But that's not true. If somebody actually took it, it would be bad for the other Jew. Because now somebody else owns the apartment and is sharing the chatzer with him. So the answer is Amar Rav Papa Ema Afal Pishachzik. What it means is even though somebody took it, it doesn't prohibit. Veha Afal Pishalo Echzik Katane. But it says even though nobody took it. Haki Gamra is what it means. Afal Pishachzik Mishachashecha Kevet Lava Lelachzik Mibod Yom Ena Oser. So the whole point is here that the ger died on Shabbat. A Jew comes and takes his apartment. Right? So what it means is even if a Jew comes and takes his apartment on Shabbat, since he couldn't have taken it before Shabbat, he doesn't prohibit the other Jew. Only where he could have taken it on Shabbat does he prohibit the other Jew. I mean, only when he could have taken it on Friday does he prohibit. So it all depends on when the ger died. If the ger died on Friday, then even if the Jew didn't come take his property until Shabbat, he'll still prohibit the other Jew. Because we say since he could have come on Friday and could have taken it from Friday, we act like he took it from Friday. But if the ger died on Shabbat, and then another Jew comes and takes the apartment, since he couldn't have taken it on Friday, it doesn't interfere with the Jew who already lived there before. So the Jew who lived in the second apartment and wanted to use the chatzer is still free to use the chatzer. Okay? So katani mihat, but we learn here, resha oser. But the first case it says, he prohibits. In other words, if the Jew comes in and inherits the property of the non-Jew, right? Or, I'm sorry, not the non-Jew, the convert. So he inherits the property on Shabbat. It says that he prohibits the other Jew, even though he didn't come into possession of it until Shabbat started. So that's the same as the case of the son whose father died on Shabbat, and he inherits the thing. It's the same thing. Right. So why is he? But it says oser that he prohibits the second Jew. So why don't we say the same thing about the son who inherits? That he's oser. He can't give up his rights to the chatzer anymore. So the answer is amai oser. So nivtil. Why can't he give up his rights to the other Jew? Mai oser de katane ad shivatel. It's not really a problem. In other words, what it means is that just like if the son inherits from the father on Shabbat, he prohibits everybody else from using the chatzer until he gives up his rights. So too, if the Jew comes, if the convert dies on Shabbat, and this other guy comes in and takes his property, he only prohibits the other Jew. I'm sorry, when the convert dies on Erev Shabbat, rather. When the convert dies on Erev Shabbat and a Jew comes in and takes his property, he only prohibits the other Jew unless he gives him his rights. But he can give his rights. He can give them. So Rabbi Yochanan Amar Matnitin Mani. Rabbi Yochanan says, whom does our Mishnah follow? Bet Shammai. It follows Bet Shammai. Okay? Where it talks about a Yoresh prohibiting those members of the chatzer. In other words, that if you inherit the rights from somebody else on Shabbat, that you prohibit everybody else, it's Bet Shammai. The Amrei en bitul reshut b'Shabbat, because Bet Shammai says you cannot give up your rights to the chatzer on Shabbat. Ditznan, as we learned in the Mishnah, when can you give up your rights to the Chatzer? Beit Shammai omrim be'od yom. Beit Shammai say only during the day. Beit Hillel omrim mishetechshach. Beit Hillel say only that even on Shabbat itself you can do it. So in other words, a yoresh is somebody who comes into possession of the property on Shabbat. According to Beit Shammai, there's no way he can do it because even if we say that the son is an extension of the father, still you can't do bitul reshut on Shabbat. You can't give up your rights to the Chatzer on Shabbat. It's like making an Eruvei Chatzerot on Shabbat. You're not allowed to do it. Beit Hillel says you can. Amar Ula says, "My tamad Beit Hillel." What's the reason for Beit Hillel? Why does Beit Hillel allow you to give up your rights on Shabbat? Because Na'asa ke'omer kelach etzel yafot. It's like a person who says, go to the good things. So what is this talking about? This is talking about a case where somebody goes ahead and separates terumah from your produce without telling you. You walk in and see the guy separating your terumah from your produce, and you say to him, don't give that as terumah, give the better stuff. Kelach etzel yafot, go for the I would have given the better stuff. But what does that imply? That implies you gave him permission to separate your terumah. You're just telling him give the better stuff. So Rashi says if there really was better stuff and you were really being sincere, you should have given the better stuff. You're endorsing that he's separating terumah for you. You're just saying, you should have given the other stuff. So in the same way, the person who gives up their rights to the Chatzer on Shabbat is saying, really, I would have given it to you all along. I just didn't give it to you till now. So if I come to a person and he's separating terumah, and I say, you should have given this instead of that, I'm saying I really endorsed it from the beginning. I'm just giving you advice, So too, the person who didn't give up their reshut on Erev Shabbat, they want to give it up on Shabbat, really they're saying all along I wanted to give it. All along it was okay with me. Abaye says, Met nochri b'Shabbat, mai kelach etzel yafot ika. That's not really true. That's not how bitul reshut works. Bitul reshut on Shabbat doesn't work because we say that when you gave up your rights to the Chatzer, it's as if you gave it up from the beginning of Shabbat. It's as if all along you intended to give it up. That's not true. Because we see that when the non-Jew was in the Chatzer and he dies on Shabbat, you couldn't have given up your rights to the Chatzer on Erev Shabbat because the non-Jew was there. And when the non-Jew is there, you can't do anything. So we see that the circumstance changed, the non-Jew died, and yet you're allowed to give up your rights to the Chatzer to somebody else if the non-Jew dies. So what does that show you? Even if beforehand you couldn't have done it, and only now you can do it, you're allowed to. So Beit Hillel's idea that you're allowed to do bitul reshut on Shabbat is not only when you could have done it before Shabbat. Even where you couldn't have done it before Shabbat, you can still do it. So therefore, what's the explanation of Beit Hillel? The Beit Shammai savar bitul reshut mikna reshutahu umikna reshuta b'Shabbat asur. Ubeit Hillel savar istaluke reshuta be'almahu v'istaluke reshuta b'Shabbat shapir dame. The argument really is that Beit Shammai holds that when I give up my rights to the Chatzer, what am I doing? You are acquiring my rights. So what are we doing? Mikacho mimkar. We're buying and selling. We're making a transaction. You are acquiring my rights. You're acquiring property on Shabbat. And you're not allowed to do that. So Beit Shammai says you're not allowed to give up your reshut to somebody else because they are acquiring it from you. They're buying something.
Beit Hillel does not accept.
Beit Hillel says no. When you do bitul reshut, you're not giving it. You're giving up. You're excluding yourself. You're removing yourself. So since all you're doing is removing yourself, that's not considered a transaction on Shabbat. That's not considered that somebody is acquiring property on Shabbat, and that's why it's allowed even on Shabbat itself.